principally on the bayonet, and encouraging them by the steady firmness of his countenance, as well as by his words, to a vigorous performance of their duty. The author states this on his own observation, Marshall added. Proudly, I was there. Self-effacingly, he put it in a footnote. After 2 days of skirmishing, the British withdrew. Washington would not be lured from his prepared positions, and Howe decided it would be too risky to assault them. Marshall explained the enemy's retreat thus: Howe's return to Philadelphia without bringing on an action, after marching out with the avowed intention of fighting, is the best testimony of the respect which he felt for the talents of his adversary and the courage of the troops he was to encounter. Washington's talents, soldiers' courage. Marshall would never forget them. The Revolutionary Army drew patriotic young men from every state who risked privation, injury, and death for their common country. The man who commanded them struck where he could and stood firm when he had to. He was judicious, brave, and a leader of men. For the rest of his life, John Marshall saw Washington as his commander and himself as one of his troops. In 1787, Washington left his post-war retirement to preside over the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. Marshall, still in his early 30s, was not yet eminent enough to be sent as a delegate to that meeting, but in 1788 he served in the Virginia Ratifying Convention in Richmond, defending the Constitution that Washington had signed. In 1798, Washington summoned his former junior officer to Mount Vernon and told him to run for Congress. Marshall obeyed. In 1799, after the great man died, it was Marshall who eulogized him on the floor of the House as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. But Washington was more than a hero to Marshall. He was a man with principles and an agenda, who had learned from the privations of his army the need for a capable national government, and who then worked as a constitution maker and president to design and lead one. How could Marshall support Washington while he lived and defend his handiwork after he was gone? The most obvious way was politics, and Marshall had an abiding interest in it. In the first national two-party system that emerged in the 1790s, the party Marshall joined was the Federalists. Their policies were Washington's: a strong federal government that could pay its debts, foster commerce, and sustain a unified nation in a turbulent world. Marshall was friendly with every prominent Federalist: Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, Timothy Pickering, even when, as their party began to sink at the turn of the century, they turned on each other. The only man Marshall ever hated was Federalism's enemy and destroyer, and his own cousin, Thomas Jefferson. Federalism withered and died, new parties emerged. Marshall kept tabs on them all. He was touted as a presidential candidate himself in one election season, and in another he attended America's first national political convention, organized by America's first third party. The Marshall campaign went nowhere, as did the third party. Yet although politics was a lifelong interest of Marshall's, it was not his main one. He had a vocation, which was the law. His father Thomas had decided that his eldest child should be a lawyer. William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, then the most popular legal text in the English-speaking world, was part of John's homeschooling. In 1780, while on a furlough from the Army, he attended a course of lectures in the law at William and Mary, the only formal legal instruction he would ever receive. But since the course was given by George Wythe, one of the top legal minds in the country, it was first-rate. After the war, Marshall established a practice in Richmond, Virginia's new capital, quickly joining the state's legal elite. His practice was so engrossing that he refused several offers of national public office. In 1801, however, after serving in Congress and as Secretary of State, he agreed to become the nation's Chief Justice. The Supreme Court that Marshall led was the federal government's fledgling, almost its orphan. In 12 years it had traveled with the nation's capital.